Don't close that door. My little girl can't breathe. Daniel Hayes was on his knees in the rain, holding 8-year-old Sophie against his soaked delivery jacket while a hospital security guard blocked the glowing ER entrance with one palm raised. Sophie's small wrist slipped from her sleeve, and an old donor bracelet flashed under the red emergency lights. Across the wet curb, Robert Lang stepped out of a black sedan and froze. "Sir," Daniel said, voice shaking but controlled. "She needs a pulse check." The guard touched his radio. "Situation is contained." Sophie blinked at Robert and whispered, "Mommy said this means somebody kept breathing." 3 hours earlier, the night had still looked ordinary enough to break a man slowly instead of all at once. The rain had started as a soft tapping against the window of Daniel's small apartment, a tired second-floor place above a closed laundromat, where the hallway smelled faintly of detergent, old carpet, and someone else's dinner. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter in his faded delivery shirt, packing Sophie's medication into a plastic sandwich bag because the zipper on her little medical pouch had broken last week. Sophie sat at the table in pink socks, drawing a crooked heart on the corner of her homework page. She was trying to look fine. That was what hurt him most. Her breathing had a shallow hitch tonight. Not dramatic, not movie-like. Just one tiny pause between inhale and exhale that Daniel knew too well. He had heard it before hospital visits, before long nights under fluorescent lights, before doctors used soft voices. "Chest tight?" he asked. Sophie shrugged, then nodded once because she was 8 and brave in the way children are brave when they do not want to scare the only parent left in the room. Daniel crouched in front of her, his work pants still damp at the knees from the last delivery route. "Tell me the truth, sophomore." She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, the old one she wore when she missed Margaret most. The printed code had faded at the edges, but the letters were still there if the light hit right. "It feels like a bird is stuck in there," she whispered, touching her chest. Daniel did not panic. Panic was a luxury for men who had someone else to take over. He zipped the medicine bag, grabbed her hospital tag from the drawer, and wrapped her in Margaret's gray cardigan before carrying her down the stairs. Outside, rain blurred the streetlights into yellow halos. His delivery van coughed twice before starting, and Sophie tried to smile from the passenger seat. "Are you mad?" she asked. "No, baby." He pulled into the road, one hand on the wheel, one hand reaching over to warm her fingers.
"I'm listening."
The hospital rose ahead of them 20 minutes later, all glass, steel, and clean white light, the kind of building that looked merciful from the outside. Daniel parked crooked near the emergency entrance and lifted Sophie into his arms. The automatic doors opened with a soft sigh, and warm air rushed over them, carrying the smell of sanitizer, wet coats, and burned coffee. A camera in the ceiling tilted slightly as they stepped inside. At the reception counter, a woman in blue scrubs looked up from her monitor, her smile professional but thin. Daniel placed Sophie's hospital tag, medication bag, and insurance card on the counter in a careful line, as if neatness could make poverty less suspicious. Behind the glass, the printer clicked once, then stopped. The receptionist's eyes flicked toward the screen. Her fingers froze above the keyboard for half a second. Daniel saw only one line reflected in the counter glass before she minimized the window. "Emergency relief. Available." The words "emergency relief. Available" stayed on the glass for less than a second before the receptionist clicked them away, but Daniel Hayes had already seen them. He leaned forward just enough to steady Sophie with one arm and point gently at the monitor with the other. "Ma'am, that said available. Insurance first. She's having chest pain." "Sir, please stay behind the yellow line." The overhead lights buzzed with that dry hospital sound that makes every breath feel measured, every mistake feel documented. Rainwater dripped from Daniel's jacket onto the polished floor, forming a small dark pool beside his worn work boots, and Sophie's hospital tag lay on the counter like a little plea no one wanted to touch. The receptionist took Daniel's insurance card between 2 fingers, scanned it again, then watched the screen with a face trained not to change. "Mr. Hayes," she said, in a voice so polite it almost sounded kind, "your coverage expired at 12:01 this morning." Daniel stared at her, then at Sophie, then back at the card. I renewed it last week. I made the payment. The system doesn't show active coverage. Can someone check her first? We have procedures for financial clearance. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes had already moved past him to the next person in line. Behind Daniel, someone sighed loudly. A man in a suit muttered, "Some people wait until it's an emergency to handle their bills." Daniel heard it. Sophie heard it too. Her fingers tightened around the sleeve of Margaret's gray cardigan, and the donor bracelet on her wrist clicked softly against the counter edge. Daniel did not turn around. He did not defend his job, his apartment, his bank account, or the fact that he had spent the last 6 years learning which medicines could be split, which appointments could be postponed, and which symptoms could not. He simply took one slow breath and lowered his voice. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to be her father." The receptionist's pen slipped from her hand and rolled toward Daniel's side of the counter. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Daniel bent down, picked it up, wiped a bit of rainwater from the plastic with his thumb, and placed it back through the opening in the glass. The small courtesy seemed to irritate her more than anger would have. She clicked another box. A red banner appeared across Sophie's file. "Pending verification. You'll need to take a seat." Her lips are turning blue. "A nurse will call you when the intake review clears." Daniel looked toward the double doors where nurses moved in and out under a sign that read emergency treatment area. He stepped only half a foot past the yellow line. Not toward the receptionist, not toward the crowd, only toward the swinging doors as a young doctor passed with a clipboard. "Doctor," Daniel called, calm but urgent. "Please, just listen to her chest." The receptionist's hand went to the phone. "Security to intake." The words were soft, almost administrative, but the air around Daniel changed. Two people looked up from their phones. A mother pulled her child closer. Sophie tried to sit straighter, embarrassed without knowing why. A broad-shouldered security supervisor arrived with a black radio clipped to his vest and a practiced expression of reasonable concern. "Sir, you need to step back. My daughter needs a medical screening. You're disrupting intake. I'm asking for help, and we're asking you to comply." The supervisor's eyes flicked over Daniel's faded delivery shirt. The grease-darkened seam near his cuff, the old cap tucked in his back pocket. He did not say poor. He did not have to. The word was in the way he squared his shoulders between Daniel and the treatment doors. The receptionist printed something, then glanced down sharply as if the machine had betrayed her. A small slip curled out beside the scanner, marked emergency relief. Available. Then beneath it, status. VCFIN hold. Her face tightened. She folded it once, twice, and pushed it beneath a stack of intake forms before anyone else could read it. But from the row of chairs near the vending machines, Nurse Elena saw her do it. And from the ceiling above the desk, the black eye of the hallway camera blinked red, recording Daniel's empty hands while the system quietly renamed him non-compliant. The red light on the hallway camera blinked above Daniel Hayes like a quiet accusation, and beneath it, he did the one thing the report would never mention. He stepped back from the yellow line. He lowered Sophie carefully into the nearest plastic chair. Then he folded his soaked delivery jacket and tucked it behind her shoulders so the hard chair would not press into her back. "Stay with me, Soph," he whispered. "Just little breaths." Sophie nodded, but her eyes had gone glassy in the fluorescent glare. Around them, the waiting room kept moving in that strange hospital rhythm. Shoes squeaking over polished floor, vending machines humming, phones buzzing in tired hands, coughs swallowed into sleeves. No one wanted to look too long at the man who had just been labeled a problem. The security supervisor stayed near the intake desk, pretending not to watch while watching every movement Daniel made. The receptionist spoke into her headset with soft professional concern. But every few seconds her fingers moved over the mouse, clicking through Sophie's file like she was trying to bury something deeper than a name. Daniel noticed. He had spent enough years delivering packages to loading docks, clinics, offices, and locked back doors to recognize when people were not solving a problem, only moving it out of sight. Sophie tugged weakly at his sleeve. "Dad," she murmured. "Can I have water?" Daniel reached into the side pocket of his bag and pulled out the last small bottle, the one he had packed for her medicine. Before he could twist the cap, a little boy 2 chairs away began to cry. He was maybe 5, cheeks flushed, hair stuck to his forehead with fever. His mother stood at the vending machine, swiping the same card again and again while the screen blinked declined in green letters too bright for the moment. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, digging through her purse with shaking fingers. "Mommy's got it." But she did not. Daniel looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at the bottle. For 1 second, he saw the thirst in her face, the pale lips, the effort it took for her to swallow. Then Sophie gave the smallest nod, the kind Margaret used to give across a kitchen table when kindness cost more than they had. Daniel stood, walked over, and placed the unopened bottle in the mother's hand. "Don't pay me back," he said quietly. "Just keep him cool." The woman stared at him as if no one had handed her anything without a condition in a long time. "Sir, I can't." "You can." He glanced at the boy. "Fever gets mean when they're little." The security supervisor gave a short, humorless breath. "Mr. Hayes, please don't involve other patients." Daniel turned only halfway, calm enough to make the warning sound smaller than it was. "I'm not involving them. I'm helping them." Sophie tried to smile, but the motion faded as she shifted in the chair. Her cardigan sleeve slid back and the old donor bracelet tapped against the plastic armrest. Daniel crouched and gently pulled the fabric down, not hiding it from shame, just protecting the last piece of Margaret that Sophie carried into hard places. As he did, the little notebook in Sophie's lap slipped open and landed face up on the floor. A page, soft at the corners from years of being touched, showed Margaret's handwriting in faded blue ink. "Kindness keeps breathing somewhere." Nurse Elena, still near the row of vending machines, saw the words. She also saw Sophie's lips, the faint bluish tint no intake code could make harmless. Elena looked back at the camera, then at the supervisor, then at the small pulse oximeter clipped inside her own scrub pocket. She moved without making it look like a decision, crossing the waiting room with a paper cup in one hand as if she were only bringing comfort. "Let me see her finger for a second," she whispered. Daniel did not ask if she was allowed. He simply held Sophie's hand steady. The oximeter blinked once, twice, then threw a red number into the thin hospital light, and Elena's face changed because Daniel's quiet kindness had placed them all beneath a camera at the exact moment the truth began recording itself. The red number on the pulse oximeter turned Elena's face pale, but it did not make the waiting room kinder. It made the system move faster in the wrong direction. "Who authorized that?" the security supervisor asked, stepping toward her. "She's desatting. That's not an intake clearance. She's a child." The words landed hard, but the room did not rise with them. It shrank. The receptionist reached for the phone again, her nails clicking against the plastic receiver, while Daniel kept Sophie's hands still, as if the tiny glowing clip were the only honest thing in the whole building. He did not snatch it away. He did not point at the red number like a weapon. He simply looked at the supervisor and asked, "If the machine says she can't wait, what exactly are we waiting for?" For 1 second, even the vending machine seemed to stop humming. Elena swallowed, then tried to speak in a voice that would not get her fired. "She needs a medical screening. Now." The supervisor glanced up at the camera, then toward the intake desk, where the receptionist had already begun typing into Sophie's file. Daniel saw the words reflected faintly in the glass behind her. Disruptive contact with staff. He took a slow breath through his nose, the way he did when rent was late, when the van needed a repair he could not afford, when Sophie asked whether hospital bills went away if you prayed hard enough. "Don't write that," he said softly. The receptionist looked up. "Excuse me? That isn't what happened." "Sir, this is documentation." "Then document her oxygen." His voice never rose, but the quietness made people look over. A woman near the door lowered her phone. A man in a ball cap stopped pretending to read the wall poster about patient dignity. The little boy who had taken Sophie's water leaned against his mother. Calmer now, the unopened cap finally twisted loose in his hands. The supervisor moved closer to Daniel, careful not to touch him where cameras could see. Mr. Hayes, you're escalating. Daniel looked down at Sophie. Her eyes were half closed. No, he said. Her heart is. That was when Elena's phone buzzed in her scrub pocket. She glanced down only because the sound came twice, sharp and urgent. On the lock screen, an internal message flashed from the finance office. No charity intake before board review. Document as policy delay. Elena's thumb froze above the screen. She did not open it. She did not have to. The receptionist saw Elena see it, and her mouth tightened just enough to become a confession to anyone paying attention. Then the supervisor reached for Daniel's elbow. You need to step outside while we sort this out. Daniel pulled his arm back, not violently, just enough to keep holding Sophie. She doesn't go outside. You can come back when you calm down. She can't breathe outside. Sir. Listen to her. But the sentence broke when Sophie coughed, small and dry, the sound of a little body asking for more air than the room was willing to give. Her sleeve slipped back again. The old donor bracelet caught the fluorescent light, the faded code along its edge darkened by rainwater and the touch of Daniel's thumb. MH 417. Elena saw it clearly for the first time. So did the security supervisor, though to him it was just another old hospital band, another sentimental object people clung to when forms failed them. Minutes later, under pressure, under polite orders, under the false calm of procedure, Daniel found himself beyond the automatic doors with Sophie in his arms and rain slanting across the curb. That was where Robert Lang arrived, black sedan tires hissing through shallow water, coat collar raised against the storm. He saw a wet delivery driver holding a sick child, a security guard blocking the entrance, and a little bracelet shining on a trembling wrist. He had every reason not to believe the man on the ground. He had a hospital to protect, a board meeting waiting, staff telling him there had been a disturbance. But then Sophie whispered, "Mommy said this meant somebody got to live," and Robert's hand moved slowly to the inside pocket of his suit jacket, where an old donor letter had been folded for years along a crease that hid the final digit of a code he suddenly needed to see. Robert Lang did not pull the donor letter out all the way. Not yet. His fingers found the folded paper inside his jacket, felt the old crease, the soft edge worn from years of being carried too close to the heart, and then he looked at Daniel Hayes like a man trying to separate coincidence from truth in the middle of a storm. "Bring the child inside," he said. The security supervisor hesitated. "Mr. Lang." Intake marked him non-compliant. Robert's eyes did not leave Sophie. "Then mark me responsible." The automatic doors opened, and warm hospital air rushed over Daniel's wet face as he carried his daughter back through the same entrance that had just rejected them. No one clapped. No one apologized. The waiting room only shifted, whispers thinning into something quieter as Daniel passed the yellow line with Sophie in his arms. A young ER doctor met them near a curtained exam bay, hair rumpled, stethoscope already in hand, his expression caught between urgency and the fear of crossing hospital protocol. "Mr. Hayes, I need facts fast," he said. "Medication, furosemide, pediatric. Dose mornings, enalapril twice daily. Albuterol only if the breathing gets tight. But tonight it didn't sound like asthma. Last admission? February 14th. 3 nights. Room 312. Allergies. Ceftonir. Rash and swelling. It's in her chart." The doctor looked up, surprised by the precision. Daniel did not seem proud of it. He looked exhausted by it, as if every answer had been carved into him during nights no one else had stayed awake. From his wallet, he removed a cracked plastic hospital tag with Sophie's name faded along one edge, then a folded prescription list, then a small paper calendar covered in pencil marks, each square carrying a time, a dose, a tiny check. His hands trembled only after he set the papers down. "I'm not guessing," he said. "I listened to her breathe." Victor Crane arrived before the monitor was even clipped to Sophie's finger. He wore a charcoal suit and the kind of calm that made cruelty sound like management. "Robert," he said gently, as if they were discussing a scheduling inconvenience, "we should be careful about allowing emotional pressure to override established intake standards." Daniel looked at him once, then back at Sophie. He had no room left for powerful men's vocabulary. The doctor placed the leads on Sophie's chest. The adhesive circles looked too large on her small body. A machine beside the bed blinked awake, green lines crawling across a black screen. For a moment there was only the soft beep of the monitor, the drip of Daniel's jacket onto the floor, and the low hum of the vents overhead. Then the rhythm stuttered. The doctor's face changed. Elena saw it too. Robert saw the doctor stop breathing for half a second before he said, "She needs cardiac monitoring now." The security supervisor, who had been ready to write Daniel as a problem, lowered his radio. The receptionist at the desk stopped typing. Even Victor's polished expression tightened, just at the corners. "Of course," Victor said quickly. "Now that medical necessity is established, we can proceed appropriately." Daniel did not turn that sentence into a fight. He only moved to the side of the bed, brushed damp hair from Sophie's forehead, and whispered, "You're doing good, baby." Sophie's fingers found his sleeve. "Did I get in trouble?" "No," he said, and his voice nearly broke on the mercy of that lie. "You told the truth." Robert placed his hand slowly on the foot of the bed, not touching Sophie, not claiming authority over her, just anchoring himself to what the monitor had proven. Then he looked at Elena. "Preserve the intake footage. All of it." Victor's head turned. "That seems premature." Robert's reply was quiet. So was sending her outside. Elena stepped toward the nurse's station, and as she opened the emergency fund screen, Daniel saw her face flicker again. Not fear this time. Recognition. She angled the tablet just enough for Robert to see the balance still sitting in the account Victor had called temporarily exhausted, and beside it, in small gray letters, was the same hold code from the crumpled slip. VCFIN hold. The code on Elena's tablet sat there like a quiet fingerprint. VCFIN hold. Not a glitch, not a missing payment, not a tired receptionist making a hard call at the wrong hour. A hold. Placed on an emergency fund that still had money in it. Robert Lang stared at the screen while the monitor beside Sophie kept beeping, each sound small and sharp against the curtain walls of the exam bay. "Open the transaction history," he said. Elena's thumb hovered for a second, because opening it meant leaving her name in the access log, and everyone in the room understood that courage in a hospital could look as simple as touching a screen. She tapped once. The page loaded slowly, line by line, the white light reflecting on Daniel's wet hands as he stood beside Sophie's bed. 11 entries appeared under the same hold code. 11 families. 11 delays. 11 quiet emergencies turned into administrative language. Victor Crane adjusted his cuffs. "Robert, emergency relief review is a standard financial control. For 11 cases? Across 3 months, yes. That is not unusual for a hospital of this size. Were they medically screened first?" Victor's smile did not disappear, but it thinned. "I would need to review each file." Daniel looked at the names without moving closer. He saw a child, listed beside an asthma consult, an elderly man flagged for transfer, a mother marked incomplete payment authorization. The letters blurred for a second, not because he could not read them, but because each line had a face he would never meet. Sophie breathed under an oxygen mask now, her lashes damp, one hand curled around the edge of Margaret's cardigan. Daniel could have shouted. He could have pointed at Victor, at the receptionist, at every polished word that had turned his daughter into a delay. Instead, he reached down and tucked the blanket higher over Sophie's shoulder. "Don't use her to hide the others," he said. The room went still enough for the printer at the nurse's station to sound loud when it stopped halfway through a page. Robert looked at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel kept his eyes on his daughter. "If you help her because you know someone, then the next kid still waits outside." It was not an accusation. That was why it landed harder. Robert's face changed, not with pity, but with the first weight of responsibility. He turned to Elena. "Print the hold list. Preserve the access log." Victor stepped forward. "That information contains protected financial records. Then legal can stand here while we read it." Victor's eyes flicked toward the ceiling camera before he caught himself. It was a tiny movement, but Daniel saw it. So did Robert. Elena pulled up the next screen, and an email header appeared beneath the fund notes. Charity leakage reduction, sent from Victor's office the morning before the board profit review. The phrase looked clean enough to survive a meeting. It sounded almost responsible. But beside Sophie's monitor, beside the hospital tag Daniel had kept in his wallet, beside the prescription list with pencil checks made by a father who had never stopped showing up, the words became something else. A door closing. Quietly, repeatedly, Robert reached into his jacket and finally removed the folded donor letter. But he did not open it all the way. Not in front of Daniel. Not yet. Call transplant records, he said to his assistant on the phone, voice lower now. I need lawful verification of a donor code beginning MH417. And call my son. Tell Noah to bring the original letter. Victor's hand went to his own phone. Robert, I strongly recommend we handle this in conference room B. Daniel looked up then, rain still dripping from the hem of his jacket onto the sterile floor. No, he said quietly. Handle it where you made her wait. Outside the curtain, the same hallway where Daniel had been labeled non-compliant glowed under fluorescent light, and for the first time that night, the truth was too heavy to carry behind a closed door. They brought the confrontation back to the intake hallway, not because it was convenient, but because that was where the lie had first learned to stand upright. The yellow lines still glowed on the floor beneath the fluorescent lights. The same glass window reflected Daniel Hayes in his soaked delivery shirt, his hair damp, his hands empty, while Sophie lay on a narrow transport bed nearby with an oxygen mask fogging softly against her small face. Elena stood close to Sophie's side, one hand near the monitor lead, the other holding the crumpled slip she had finally pulled from the trash. Robert Lang did not stand at the front like a man performing authority. He stood off to the side, quiet, watching who reached for the truth and who reached for control. Victor Crane arrived with 2 board members and a leather folder tucked beneath his arm, his expression composed enough to almost make the whole thing feel like a misunderstanding. This has become emotionally charged, he said, voice low and careful. No one here wants a child harmed, but hospitals cannot operate on panic. We follow procedures so care remains fair. For a moment, the words did what polished words often do. They cooled the room. The receptionist lowered her eyes. The security supervisor straightened as if he had been handed permission to believe himself. Even one board member glanced at Daniel's wet clothes before looking away. Daniel did not step forward. He only reached into his pocket and placed Sophie's old hospital tag on the counter, beside the donor bracelet Margaret had left behind, beside the medication list marked with pencil checks. The plastic tag made a small sound against the glass. She was already your patient, he said, before she was your paperwork. Victor folded his hands. And once medical necessity was established, she received care. Robert's gaze moved to Elena. Elena placed the crumpled slip beside the hospital tag and smoothed it with 2 fingers. Emergency relief. Available. Status. VCFIN hold. The hallway seemed to tighten around the letters. Victor nodded as if he had expected it. That is a finance review marker. It does not deny care. It prevents misuse of limited charity funds. The explanation sounded reasonable enough to survive a meeting, and that was the first retention spike. For one cold second, it seemed he might bury Sophie beneath vocabulary again. Then Daniel looked at the security supervisor's radio and asked, "Why did you tell them we were removed before anyone reviewed her oxygen?" No one answered quickly. Robert lifted one finger, and a technician at the nurse's station opened the intake camera file. The screen showed Daniel bending to pick up the receptionist's pen, placing it back through the window, stepping only half a foot past the yellow line, then backing away when asked. No shouting, no threat, no raised fist, only a father holding a child who was slipping. Victor's jaw tightened, but he recovered. Camera angles don't capture tone. Robert's eyes did not blink. Then let's hear tone. The technician opened the bodycam audio from the security supervisor's vest. Static hissed first, then Sophie's small cough, then Daniel's voice, low and controlled. She can't breathe outside. A chair scraped somewhere behind them and stopped halfway. The receptionist's hand moved to her mouth. The The security supervisor looked down at his boots. Victor shifted his folder from one hand to the other, and a pale envelope slid halfway into view before he pushed it back. Robert saw it. Daniel saw it too. Victor forced a thin smile. "Mr. Hayes, the hospital is prepared to offer temporary private assistance for your daughter, and we can discuss a confidential resolution after she stabilizes." He placed the envelope on the counter like it was mercy. Daniel looked at the paper, then at Sophie, then at the hallway doors where other families still waited with forms in their hands. He pushed the envelope back with 2 fingers. "I'm not here to sell the part where you closed the door." The second spike came when Robert opened Victor's email thread on the hallway monitor. Charity leakage reduction, sent the morning before the board profit review. Linked to 11 delayed cases under the same hold code. Victor's face did not collapse. Men like him did not collapse in public. But he did something worse. He looked toward the camera before answering. "Context matters," he said. Robert turned as the elevator at the end of the hallway chimed. A teenage boy stepped out clutching a plastic sleeve to his chest, and behind him, the transplant records clerk carried a sealed verification file. Noah Lang had arrived with the original donor letter, and for the first time all night, Victor Crane stopped talking. Noah Lang stopped beneath the fluorescent lights with the plastic sleeve pressed to his chest, and the hallway seemed to make room for him without anyone asking. The transplant records clerk broke the seal on the verification file at the counter, hands careful, voice steady, while Robert Lang unfolded the donor letter Noah had carried for years. The paper was soft at the creases, the ink a little faded, but the code was still visible near the bottom. H for 17L. Elena gently lifted Sophie's wrist. Rainwater had dried in tiny streaks along the old donor bracelet, and when the clerk placed the hospital transplant record beside it, the 3 codes lined up under the white light like a truth no one could talk around anymore.
MH 417L Margarete.
Liver donor.
Recipient, Noah Lang.
The monitor beside Sophie kept beeping, small and regular beneath her oxygen mask, and that sound became the loudest thing in the hallway because every human voice had disappeared. Robert looked at the bracelet, then at Noah, then at Daniel Hayes, the wet delivery driver who had been called non-compliant less than an hour before. Daniel did not move. He stood beside Sophie's bed with one hand on the rail, his other hand resting near her blanket, as if the world could split open and his first duty would still be keeping his daughter warm. Noah took one step closer, his face drained of color. "Dad," he whispered, but Robert could not answer. Sophie's eyes opened halfway. She saw the older boy staring at her bracelet, saw the paper in his hand, saw her father's fingers tighten on the bed rail. She did not understand hospital records or audit logs or why grown-ups suddenly looked like they had forgotten how to breathe. She only remembered the sentence Margaret had taught her, the one Daniel had repeated on hard nights when grief sat at the kitchen table with them. Sophie lifted her wrist a few inches. Her voice was weak, child-small, and clear enough to cut through every polished excuse in that hallway. "My mommy saved your boy." The words did not echo. They landed. A pen slipped from the receptionist's hand and clicked once on the floor. The security supervisor lowered his eyes. One board member covered his mouth, not for drama, but because shame had found him before language could. Victor Crane opened his folder, then closed it again, his fingertips pressing so hard into the leather that the skin went pale. "This was never personal," he said, but his voice came out dry. Robert turned slowly toward him. "No," he said, "that is exactly the problem." He lifted the donor letter in one hand and pointed toward the hallway monitor with the other. On the screen, the audit log showed Victor's finance account placing VCFIN hold on the emergency fund the morning before the board profit review. Beneath it, the email thread still read charity leakage reduction. Then the body cam audio played again, softer this time but impossible to mistake. Daniel's voice saying, "She can't breathe outside," followed by Sophie coughing in the rain. Victor looked toward the ceiling camera as though it might rescue him from the room it had recorded. It did not. Robert's voice stayed low, and that made it heavier. "Mr. Crane is suspended effective immediately. His access to patient relief funds is revoked. Legal will preserve every audit trail, every email, every security recording." The board will authorize emergency care first and review payment after screening, starting with this child and then every case. On that list, Victor's lips parted, but no explanation came. There was nowhere left for procedure to hide. Daniel looked at the envelope Victor had offered him, still sitting on the glass counter, then looked at the 11 names glowing on the monitor. He did not smile. He did not thank the room for finally seeing him. He only bent close to Sophie and adjusted the edge of her oxygen mask with a tenderness that made Robert look away. Noah stepped beside the bed, holding the donor letter like something sacred and unbearable. "She gave me a life," he whispered. Daniel's eyes stayed on his daughter. "Then make sure hers isn't the only one this place remembers." And as the hallway remained silent around him, the first real question after justice began to form. Now that Daniel Hayes had the truth, would he use it for his own miracle, or for every family still waiting outside the door? The hallway did not erupt after Robert Lang suspended Victor Crane. It emptied slowly, almost reverently, as if people were afraid that loud footsteps might disturb the truth still lying on the glass counter. Victor was escorted not by shouting guards or public disgrace, but by legal staff carrying sealed folders, access badges collected, accounts frozen, audit trails preserved before anyone could touch them. The receptionist remained at her station with red eyes, watching a technician correct Sophie Hayes' file from non-compliant to emergency cardiac admission. The word looked small on the screen, but to Daniel it felt like someone had finally moved a stone off his daughter's chest. Sophie was taken to surgery before dawn. Daniel walked beside the rolling bed until the double doors stopped him, and when they did, he did not argue. He bent down, kissed the edge of her forehead, and tucked Margaret's gray cardigan around her shoulders until a nurse gently told him they had to go. The donor bracelet stayed on Sophie's wrist until the last possible moment. Then Elena placed it in Daniel's palm with both hands, as carefully as if she were returning a heartbeat. Hours later, when the surgeon came out under the pale morning light and said Sophie was stable, Daniel sat down before his legs. Could fail him. He covered his face with his rough hands, but he did not sob loudly. The relief moved through him quietly, like warmth returning to a house after a long winter. Robert stood a few steps away with Noah beside him, neither of them speaking until Daniel lowered his hands. "Mr. Hayes," Robert said, "what my hospital did to your family was wrong." Daniel looked at him, tired beyond anger. "Then don't let it become a story you tell once and forget." That sentence became the shape of everything that followed. The Emergency Relief Fund was reopened that week, not as a private favor, but under a new rule. Medical screening before payment verification, every time, every child, every emergency. The 11 families listed under VCFI and hold were contacted by patient advocates, their cases reviewed, their balances paused, their care restored where it could still be restored. An outside audit took Victor Crane's emails, the NDA envelope, the bodycam audio, the hold logs, and the board profit timeline, and turned quiet harm into documented fact. Robert offered Daniel a settlement large enough to change the apartment, the van, maybe even the future. Daniel read the first page, then set it down. Not if silence is part of it. Months later, in the hospital auditorium, the same building felt different. The lights were softer. The chairs were filled not with spectators waiting for scandal, but nurses, families, transplant recipients, and people who had once believed their grief had disappeared into paperwork. At the front of the room sat a small glass case. Inside it was Margaret Hayes' donor bracelet, cleaned now, the code visible, no longer a faded band on a frightened child's wrist but a witness. Beneath it, at Daniel's request, the plaque did not name only Margaret. It read, "For every unknown donor who kept someone breathing." Sophie stood beside Daniel, thinner than before but steady, her fingers wrapped around two of his. Noah approached slowly with the original donor letter in his hands. He looked at Sophie, then at Daniel, then at the bracelet that had carried his second chance through a storm. "Your mother gave me a second life," he said. Sophie leaned against her father's side and answered in the small, honest voice of an 8-year-old who had been heard at last. "Then use it to help someone." No one applauded right away. Robert bowed his head. Elena wiped her eyes. Daniel placed his old delivery jacket over Sophie's shoulders, the same jacket that had been soaked in the rain outside the ER, and somehow it no longer looked like poverty. It looked like shelter. As they left, the automatic doors opened for another family rushing in from the parking lot, and this time no one asked for insurance before someone called for a nurse. Daniel did not look back for praise. He simply held Sophie's hand and walked into the morning, carrying the quiet truth Margaret had left behind. Dignity does not need to raise its voice, and kindness never vanishes. It only waits for the right moment to become justice.